Welcome to Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance by voices within the independent Catholic movement. For more information on inclusive Catholicism, please visit extraordinarycatholics.faith. And now, meet your hosts, Reverend Dr. Trish Sullivan-Bonney and Reverend Dr. Jayme Matthias.
Welcome to Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance. I'm Father Jayme Matthias.
And I'm Reverend Trish Sullivan-Bonney.
And for this episode, we're excited to welcome a special guest, Reverend Trish.
Well, I am always excited, Jayme, as you know, because I think we have the coolest people come on this podcast. But I am mega excited this morning as we welcome my friend, Sister Christine Schenk. She is a sister of St. Joseph. She is a longtime Cleveland person. You may have, those of us of a certain age, remember the vitality of the church in Cleveland and also remember the years that it was under siege. I met Chris at a moment in my life, a crossroads, where I thought, if I'm staying Roman Catholic, I'm staying loud. And I sought out some folks in the state of New Jersey who were beginning to bring Call to Action, which will have its 50th anniversary this year, its very first chapter to New Jersey. And it was through that effort that my path crossed with Chris Schenk. Chris is the founding director of FutureChurch, an organization that you may know. And if you don't know it, you have nevertheless been influenced by their work. They were a profoundly important voice in reclaiming the dignity and importance of Mary of Magdala, the Tower, for all of us, establishing prayer services so that people in parishes would be able to come out and remember, get over our amnesia that the first witness to the resurrection was in fact a woman. Chris was also a name that you would have seen a lot in the National Catholic Reporter for many years, as she allied with many parishes around the United States who were being forced to close, despite the fact that they were quite vibrant. She was instrumental in taking those issues to Rome. She is a prolific author. She is an expert on the early church. She has written some fantastic books about women and the life of the early church that I recommend. And we will be sure to have some of that information available to you at the end of the podcast. Recently, she published a book about Sister Kate Kinsler. It's called Bending Toward Justice, Sister Kate Kinsler, and the Struggle for Parish Rights. And this may seem like, oh, well, parish rights. Well, parish rights actually were something that were not recognized and claimed. And that's something we're going to also talk about. So I am so thrilled to welcome Chris. She started her career as a midwife, and she has never left that behind. She has been midwifing all different kinds of things, literally for decades. So, Chris, I'm so happy you're with us. Is there anything that I should add as I give you my glowing introduction that I've forgotten?
No, you promised a short introduction. Wow, you really covered the waterfront. Thank you very much. I remember visiting you when you were at PAX and being totally impressed with your organizational skills and the depth of your faith and love for Christianity and for the Catholic Church. So it's my honor to be with you, Trish.
And the one thing about becoming, it's so thrilling to be with you too. And then the one downside of having moved on into my inclusive Catholic world is you and I are no longer sitting together at tables at conferences or around board tables discussing the issues. Although the Ecumenical Catholic Communion is still a member of Catholic Organizations for Renewal. We are the one group that has stayed committed to our family of origin in that way. So let's kick it off this way. So one of the first things you and I bonded over, and you're the third Hoya on the podcast. And people are going to think I'm stacking this with, stacking my Hoyas in this podcast. But you started out as a midwife. You were passionate about that, and I'm sure gifted at it. I want to hear a little more about what took you into this entire career of speaking for justice and being an activist within the Roman Catholic system.
Oh wow. Okay. I'll take a stab at it. I really have to give a shout out to my undergraduate experience at Georgetown University, and particularly with the wonderful mentorship of Reverend William Kiefer, S.J., who really met with me regularly for 3 years when I decided there could not possibly be a God because the world was so messed up. And because of his mentoring and some interior growth and development, I came to a deeper faith. And part of that journey was an outrage that things were not the way they should be in this world, number one. And number two, God was not on board with how things were not right. And so I think from that time, I had a passion for justice and for doing something about it. I think probably my real postgraduate education, however, I did get a master's in nursing from BC, but my real postgraduate education came with the 3 years I worked as an interfaith organizer with the United Farm Workers Union in Philadelphia. And I learned everything from masters on how to do community organizing. And that gave me the tools then to address the injustices of any system that I went into after that. And so when I was in Kentucky doing my midwifery, we did a wonderful expansion of the Nurse Practice Act so that the midwives and nurse practitioners could bring healthcare with prescriptive authority to people in the mountains. And then when I moved to Ohio, we did a statewide expansion of Medicaid for low-income pregnant women who didn't have enough money to afford insurance and were showing up at emergency rooms all over the place. So, and we had great success with those things. We started a sanctuary movement for refugees from Central America. And so because of those early successes, I thought when in 1990s, early 90s, we're getting reports. I was very active in a faith community in Cleveland, the community of St. Malachy. And we were getting all these reports in the diocesan paper about the impending priest shortage. There weren't going to be enough priests. And so there was a movement by two parishes, mine, the community of St. Malachy, and the Church of the Resurrection, to begin a network to say, look, the Mass, the Eucharist, is central to Catholic worship. We need to prioritize the Mass. The male celibate priesthood is not the highest priority here. And with Father Luke Tribison, the pastor of Resurrection, we co-founded this organization called FutureChurch. And so with all of that background in community organizing and the early successes, I thought, oh, why not? We can just reform the system of the Roman Catholic Church. Little did I know what I was getting into. But that's sort of how I got into it, to tell you the truth. And, past is always prologue. So I always feel like the United Farm Workers Union gave me my postgraduate education in how to change systems, and I've never looked back.
Sister Christine, what a delight to have you with us, a fellow Buckeye from Northwest Ohio.
Right.
I'm delighted to make your acquaintance, and I'm intrigued to
Thank
know
you.
as well. You've mentioned so many experiences, from your experiences with Cesar Chavez and community organizing, your midwifery, your founding or helping to co-found FutureChurch. I'm interested how it is that those experiences have shaped your theology through the years. That is to say, looking back on your life, is your theology different now as a result of those experiences? And if so, how would that be?
I wouldn't say it's different. I would say it is much deeper. Um, and I was blessed, during the time that I'm doing all, you had all this energy when you're in your 30s and 40s. And I was also part-time working toward a master's in theology at our local seminary, of all places, where I had the great good fortune of connecting with some incredible priest theologians and female theologians. And it was, I hadn't known how hungry I was for expanding the biblical theological bases of things that I had already embraced because of my faith experience and work from Georgetown. So, and from the farm workers. So that it was huge. I think the other thing that was huge about the experience of being in the seminary, because I was part-time, I was only there, I ended up taking 6 years to get my MA, but I had the opportunity to be in class with many of the young seminarians who were going to go on and be ordained. And when I started the process, I was just so grateful to be able to learn and be in these classes, and especially deepen my biblical studies. I have to give a big shout out to Father George Smiga, which I'll say that again in a minute. But that I thought it won't matter, when these men go on to be ordained. Well, I had all this encouragement from my priest teachers telling me, like, we would love to hear you preach more often, blah, blah, blah. And so when it came time for me to graduate and I could not be ordained, I got it at a whole other level how unjust this was, at a much deeper level. And I met some wonderful young priests, some who were far more conservative, but still good people. Some were right where I was in terms of the progressive thing. And so I think in terms of the deepening, I got deeper into the injustice of the present system. And that fueled and still does fuel my energy. Now, mind you, would never want to be ordained in the present system as it exists in the Roman Catholic Church. I just, my present pastor calls it the last allowable indentured servitude in the in the world, the priesthood. But I also cannot deny that there are wonderful priests within that system who also think it needs to be changed. So anyway, but back to Father Smiga, here I am, having had 18 years of Catholic education, and in his biblical New Testament course, discovering that there was no biblical evidence whatsoever that Mary of Magdala was a prostitute, but all four gospels showed her as the woman leading and proclaiming the resurrection. So I can remember sitting in that class thinking, this is outrageous, number one. And number two, thinking that, boy, if I can ever change that, I will. And so that was sort of the foundation of, what came after. And I'm babbling too much, so I'll stop there.
This is hardly babble, Chris. So
Okay.
one of the
Well, you asked.
two things came to mind as you were talking. One of the things that, okay, so when you enter a system that's already changed, you often aren't present to the horizon that led to that change,
Mhm.
right? So two things popped into my mind. One is that women like me, and I really am saying this also for all the women in the decades following me, need to remember we are standing on the shoulders of the sisters. That the very first women who went into seminary settings and achieved master's degrees, MDivs, were coming from the religious orders.
Mhm.
And they were the trailblazers. I think of my dear friend Patricia Baumer, who was one of the very first women in Chicago to get an MDiv.
Mhm.
That is these are our sisters that are still with us. This is not, we kind of presume, oh, wasn't it always like that? Well, no, it wasn't, and we're
Right.
really standing on those shoulders. And the other thing that, as you highlighted, the dignity of Mary of Magdala, that now I think we kind of presume that everybody knows that. And yet I too remember when I was being disabused of the conflation of the woman with the alabaster jar and Mary and all these other texts. And it was new theology, it was new exegesis. So it is good to remember that, these changes are happening in certain areas and not in others, as you mentioned with
Mhm.
ordination, but that we're really still on the early trajectory in some ways. I
Mhm.
wanted to cover two topics. One, I want to start with the experience of the start of Future Church, where the unjust closing of parishes was happening, because I think that's a piece of history that is also kind of not as much in the discourse now. And then, of course, we have to talk about your scholarship and women in the early church and Mary and all that. But I don't want to just skip past that important moment. It was actually one of the closing and consolidation of parishes around the United States was part of what fueled the movement that I'm now part of.
Yeah.
When people, Boston was, on fire, Cleveland was on fire, New York City was on fire, that these parishes that had small attendance and yet were still very vibrant as communities were
Yeah.
being closed and consolidated. And there was no other strategy other than pray for vocations. That was the constant strategy. So tell us a little bit of the story in Cleveland and tell us a little bit about your experience with then trying to make canon law work on behalf of the faithful.
Yeah, and I should say that when Future Church was founded in 1990, and then when I came on as first executive director in 1994, the big closures had not happened. But what we had were the trajectories from sociologists about what was going to happen in dioceses all over the country. So I have to give a big shout out to Richard Shaner and Lawrence Young, whose book Full Pews, Empty Altars really enabled us at Future Church, in partnership with Call to Action, to visit over a period of about 4 years between, I would say, 95 and 98, 99, to go to some 60 dioceses around the country doing an awareness raising project about what was going to happen, what was coming down the road if we did nothing about the priest shortage. Virtually every bishop had kept it a big, deep, dark secret. Our bishop was unique. He believed in the laity and published the statistics in his newspaper. But it was not done. So in most of those places, it was the first public acknowledgement that this was coming. The local religion writer did an article. So in some ways, the bulk of the closings didn't begin until 2001 after the priest scandal in Boston. And then over the next 3 years, Boston closed something like 82 parishes that were vital, vibrant, solvent, the ideal parish that anybody would ever want, parishes you'd never want to close, amid great disclaimers that, oh no, no money from this will be used to pay for the clergy sex abuse crisis. And then, in fact, 5 years later, Rome acknowledged that, in fact, that money was being used for the clergy sex abuse. So, in some ways, the full deal about parish closures didn't start until 2001. And because we were parish based, I mean, there were 22 parishes who signed our initial resolution, and we had done all this education about women and optional celibacy and yada, yada, yada. But this was in many ways an attack on the core of our our constituents because they're parish centered. So the Future Church board, when they saw what was happening in Boston, realized that it was just a matter of time till every other diocese adopted the same strategy because it solved two problems for these bishops. One, they didn't have enough priests to staff the parishes that they have. And two, they needed money to pay for clergy sex abuse. So we began in 2005 a Save Our Parish community project. I ran into Sister Kate Kinsler, and that's what the Bending Toward Justice book is about, who had done her doctorate in canon law in Rome and knew how the system operated, let's just say. And she was circulating on the network talking about parish rights and the rights of the laity in the church, the rights of the Catholics in the church, which nobody knew we even had, but they were enshrined in the new code of canon law, and she was passionate about this. So we invited her to Cleveland. She gave a presentation. I knew we needed a canonical expert to help us with our Save Our Parish community project. She agreed. For the first 6 years, she had to work underground because we were also coming into the time of the Vatican's visitation of U.S. nuns, and she did not want to be public because she didn't want bishops going after her community. Her community would have stood behind her, but who needs the hassle? So for the first 6 years, she lost pretty much every single case. But there was momentum happening, and finally, in 2009, 2010, she won a case in Camden, and we're like, it suddenly the Vatican woke up that they were going to lose land. And one of the primary things of this medieval system is land is important, you know. So within 2 months, there were nine other cases that people won their case to keep the church. In the early days, they were only winning around. There are two processes that you need canonically. One is around a merger, and the other one is around closing and selling the church. So I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but Kate finally succeeded. And in Cleveland in 2012, our bishop had already closed like 62 parishes. And thankfully, because we were here and got the word out really quickly, in 2012, the Vatican reversed 13, made the bishop reopen 13 parishes in Cleveland, and he reversed the merger and the closure. So this was all happened because of Kate. And of course, we helped. FutureChurch helped. We got all the canonical resources, and it's still on our website. If people are concerned, they can download free canonical resources. And recently, the Vatican has become much more savvy to what's going on, and more people are winning their cases. So Kate and I worked as a team for quite a long time. She died sadly in 2019, but I was able to go over and get all the interviews I needed for this book, which we were going to write together. So I think, you know, along with the other things FutureChurch has done, this is one of the things that not too many people know about, because we're still doing it and trying to protect the integrity. So I wouldn't say, I mean, I was in the leadership at the time, but Kate's the one who knew how to do this. And actually, when she started, all the stuff around parish closings, it was in like 10 different places in canon law. Nobody ever had appealed this. So she really had to forge a path through canon law so that people had a shot. And most people, when they started, they didn't think they were going to win, but they thought it was the right thing to do, so they went ahead anyway. I'm sorry, it's probably way in the weeds, but it's a very important systemic thing within the institutional church that is still going on, because there are still not enough priests to staff parishes. But I'm very thankful that you know, I just found out another recent win last week. I'm trying to think, it was in Michigan, I think. Anyway,
Sister,
we've got it all documented in the book.
Sister Christine, you're just speaking to an ache in my heart. So at the
Yeah.
beginning of June, I traveled to Northwest Ohio and presented my second of four books on the destroyed Catholic communities of Seneca County, Ohio,
Oh,
which is in the
wow.
Diocese of
Yeah.
Toledo. And
Yeah.
just to see firsthand the destruction. I grew up in the old rectory of a church that is now gone and is just a pile of brick and rubble on a
Mm.
lot. And it's the saddest thing. I'm miles away. For the people there, I mean, it's an ache that they
Yeah.
feel every day when they pass the pile of
And
rubble.
the bishop who started that, I'm blanking on his name right now, but he was not from Toledo, and he just does not understand the rural experience,
Yeah.
where the parish and the church are a center of socialization. You know, I met with some of those folks early on, and it just made me furious. Anyway,
Bishop Leonard Blair of the Diocese of Toledo, who went on to become the
Inquisitor.
Inquisitor of the U.S. nuns. I mean, what a dark history. But I'm so glad that you have captured that, Sister Christine, in your newest book, Bending Toward Justice, which
Yeah.
chronicles parish closings and the struggle for parish rights. But I'm wondering, you've spent a long time documenting overlooked Catholic stories. What
Mhm.
other stories out there remain largely untold?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that segue. The first book, I retired as executive director of FutureChurch in 2013, and I did so largely because I had a book that I really wanted to write. One of the things that the FutureChurch mission did over the years, aside from chronicling parish statistics and stuff, is try to retrieve the memory of women's leadership in early Christianity. And we to that end, we took pilgrimages to Rome to look at archaeological sites of early women leaders. And I shout out to Dr. Dorothy Irvin because she was the first one who tipped me off to this and actually was our educational expert at our first pilgrimage. And so over the next couple of years, we probably led about 3 or 4 pilgrimages. The last one with Dr. Carolyn Osick, who's also a sister and also has forgotten more about women in early Christianity than most of us ever knew. And anyway, at one point we had another expert in early Christian images, Dr. Janet Tulloch, who pointed us to the Vatican's Pio Cristiano Museum, and which had all of these tombs, these sarcophagi, showing women in these preaching, proclaiming postures like this with biblical vignettes on either side of them. These are 3rd to 5th century tombs, Christian tombs. And this was at a time when women were told to be silent in the churches. They may not teach, they may not preach, yada, yada. This is what the church documents are saying. And yet here are these tombs showing the women doing these very same things. And very many of them had not only them in this posture, but on either side of them are these 2 male in-facing apostles, often with the physiognomy of Peter and Paul, paying very close attention to what they're saying. So I'm like sort of gobsmacked by looking at these images. And so I said, somebody needs to write about this. Nobody even knew this was here. And of course, right down the hall, there's a picture of Jesus, same posture, proclaiming gesture, codex, and facing apostles. And I thought, something going on here about women's authority. And so I asked them if they would, first I asked Janet, and then I asked Lynn, you guys need to write about this. This is your field. No, we're not going to write about this. And then I thought, well, heck, then I'm going to write about it. And thankfully, both of them agreed to vet my chapters so I didn't embarrass myself by some rookie mistake, because they're both doctoral people and I'm just a lowly master's person. But I had background in clinical research, so I knew a lot about statistics, or not a lot, but I knew a little bit about the territory. But one of the amazing things we found in these, and thankfully, Dr. Umberto Utro, who is the curator of the Pio Cristiano Museum, pointed me to 3 volumes from German scholars who had done all of the initial legwork that had all the plates of publicly available plates of early Christian tombs. And it was something like, I can't remember, but it was very, very, I don't remember, I forget the numbers now, but it was the whole universe of data. And so I thought, man, I'm not just going to study the ones in the Pio Cristiano Museum. If we're going to do this, we're going to do all of the tombs. And so what I discovered, and we ended up with something like 500 that I could say were actual Christian iconography, very strictly interpreted. And anyway, the deal was that the portrait tombs of women outnumbered the portrait tombs of men by 3 to 1. And thankfully, someone had just done a study of all the Roman tombs, non-Christian Roman tombs at the same time. And in those tombs, the number of portrait tombs of women and men were the same. So that was probably the signal biggest finding, just because I kept thinking, this can't be right, this can't be right. Well, here we have now in the archaeology affirming something that literary scholars had felt all along, that women were far more influential in early Christianity than men. And so it was a pretty big deal because, of course, only the wealthy could afford these tombs. And I think the other big piece was the in-facing apostle figures statistically far outnumbered for women and for men. And so the hypothesis from the book was that because they're getting all this blowback from the male leaders that they can't preach or teach or proclaim, these early women wanted to be portrayed as having the apostolic approval of Peter and Paul for their mission. I'm sorry, this is a lot to go into, but it was really a huge amount of fun, even if it took like 4 years. But that book, Crispina and Her Sisters, is the name of the book. Crispina and Her Sisters, that's Crispina. It's named after one of the women who's named on the tomb. Women in Authority in Early Christianity. And it won a first place in history from the Catholic Press Association, which was beyond amazing to me since it was my very first book. That, we had a lot of help along the way. Sorry. Anyway, so part of the deal is I went on then to do a biography of Sister Theresa Kane, who in 1979 addressed the Pope with Pope John Paul II in the second year of his reign at the National Shrine, publicly asking him to open all the ministries of the church to women. And he had had this triumphal reign through the first 4 days of his thing. And this was the first indication that everything wasn't all okay, lovely in the Catholic Church. So it became a big thing. And plus, then she got persecuted by Rome. They tried to get rid of her. But again, it's another untold story. And Kate's story about bending toward justice was the same thing. These are stories that will not be told or documented if we do not do that, and if someone doesn't write about them. And I'm currently working on a book about Sandra Schneiders, IHM, who is in one of those stained glass ceiling breakers that Trish mentioned. And, she was the first woman to get a tenure and first woman in non-Jesuit to get tenure at the Jesuit School of Theology against significant opposition. If you ask her what it was like, she tells you was like going through the Green Bay Packers line with no equipment on, So I think, again, my experience with these early Christian women, I thought we have to tell the stories because this is a very significant time in the history of the Catholic Church, with women being integrated first in theology, as Trish mentioned, and then now in other levels of decision making. So I'm sorry, I'm babbling on, but
No, Sister
I'm
Christine.
having a lot of fun.
Sister Christine, I'm just so glad that you mentioned your works, because I think, especially for our listeners who are familiar with your works, your book, for instance, Crispina and Her Sisters, exploring, the authority of women in early Christianity. I remember when I was in Istanbul or Athens, one of those cities recently, and there was a marvelous museum that had a stone statue of an early priestess. And it was just really affirming that, it's not, we're so often, we're accustomed to seeing men portrayed in whatever images, but to actually see a woman exercising her priestly function in the ancient church was just so beautiful. But it's not just leaving it in the past. You do this beautiful thing with the story of Theresa Kane, for instance, Sister Theresa, of how it is that she was willing to stand up during our own lifetimes. And so that leads to my next question in a moment, which is essentially, it deals with this prophetic leadership and the personal cost of speaking uncomfortable truths. Here in Austin, Bishop John McCarthy of happy memory was a very progressive bishop here in Austin,
Right.
who loved to tell the story. He loved to tell the story of when John Paul II came to San Antonio, and there was a luncheon with all the bishops of Texas. And during lunch, Bishop McCarthy would say, he said, "Your Holiness, here in the United States, we've been talking about the ordination of women." And he loved telling a story, because then he would pause and he said, to which His Holiness responded, "Aren't these mashed potatoes good?" It was sort of like, the same posture that he gave about quashing all conversation on the ordination of women was something that he was not even going to talk about with his brother bishop. So I'm wondering if you might be able to say something about this prophetic role into which all of us are baptized versus the very possible, there are real risks and costs that are associated with being prophetic.
Yes, there are. And certainly we have to, when we talk about the prophetic role, you can go back to Elijah and Elisha and Isaiah. And I think particularly Isaiah, because Jesus really modeled his own ministry on Isaiah. He, in our day, we'd say he stood on the shoulders of giants, but he also brought a fulfillment, And so I think any kind of prophet, and I I hesitate to apply that either to myself or to others because it's not something that's something for other people to say. It's not something I would ever want to own. But I will own the speaking truth to power aspects of Jesus' mission and our call today. And I don't think we can avoid doing that, particularly in this present time in our country, which is in some ways it's the most corrupt period of time I've ever had the displeasure of living in. And so that need for naming the truth and being unafraid to stand in it is needed now more than ever. But there are costs, and certainly we can see, certainly with Jesus, what happened in terms of his own journey through the physical, as they say, is that it was his own leaders in his own religious tradition and leaders in the political system executed him because he was speaking truth to power. But to me, that's also the power and the majesty of the resurrection, because it's God's word that death does not have the final word. And however we call death, whether it's physical death or whether it's the death dealing powers in our political system or in our religious systems that can just so discourage us that we don't even try to speak out. I think it's important to stand in that knowledge that that does not have the final word. And so I'm a big believer in the Holy Spirit and the Spirit's presence within each of us to help us know what is ours to play, what part do we have to play in bringing about that full reign of God on behalf of which Jesus gave his life.
That's so beautiful, Chris. I'm thinking about the the where you place yourself as you speak is so powerful. And I'm also thinking about the power of community around you. So, as we name these amazing women, all of, who were religious sisters, many of them were surrounded by the power of their orders. Like I think about that episode that's right in the midst of all of this when Rome wanted to discipline Joan Chittister and Sister Christine, Vladimiroff said, that's fine, go right ahead. But if you do, everyone except the sisters in the retirement center will be receiving this interdiction or whatever it was called, and how they backed down. The power of the solidarity of that monastery was so attention getting for so many of us. I felt very blessed because we were talking earlier about your visit to Pax Christi Catholic community, that I was in a very large, very progressive community with a priest who was very committed to collaborative leadership, that had basically dismantled the way power was wielded to the dismay of his bishops, Father Tim Power. And I had a platform there. I had a way to be myself there that I will cherish forever. And you're describing, how we're developed by different people and by different chapters. That was such a critical time in the deepening of my faith and the sense of my own baptismal call and dignity, and eventually realizing that I could no longer, because the system was shifting in those years, right? So you started in 94, I started in 97. I thought you were an old timer. I didn't realize that you had only been at it for 3 years, but in the church world, but that the system was tacking so hard to the right. And the young priests that were coming into all the different settings in the diocese were so conservative. And I watched, we had this amazing network of what I would call sort of Vatican II realized parishes all over the country, one by one, the life's work of these wonderful collaborative leaders being undone. That it was a very painful time in the early 2000s on, which led to me, of course, sitting with Father Tim as he was dying from cancer for about 2 years, reflecting and discerning, do I need to leave my family of origin?
Mm-hmm.
Which all of us know, whatever you leave over, whether you've decided that you are the one who's going to break the bonds of generational alcoholism or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is, that when you leave behind your family, it's deeply painful.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not something most of us have done lightly. So,
Yeah.
sometimes people look at our movement and they're like, they think we're just out here having a good time playing. Well, most of us went through a real
Mm-hmm.
arc of agony trying to decide, I was so committed to staying inside and making
Mm-hmm.
change. And there just came a point for me that I thought, I don't think I'm going to see the kind of change I want to see in my lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
My job is to witness to another possibility.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think about one set of activities that were fueled by you that I definitely want to highlight, which is Future Church at one point decided that we needed to reclaim the Feast of St. Mary of Magdala on July 22nd. Why do I know that? This is my daughter's birthday. She was born on a very auspicious day. And so we're going to reclaim this feast. And what we're going to do is publish. By then, the internet had emerged, right? That's the other thing we forget, that it wasn't like that, right?
Right.
But we could all go on the website and we could pull up prayer services, and then we could
Mm-hmm.
even send our prayer services, and we
Mm-hmm.
could report back. Well, we had 30 people, and we did this, and and leading that prayer service for me over
Mm-hmm.
the course of about 4 years, always in the garden outside the sanctuary, because we weren't limited by some sort of like liturgical law, with mostly women, overwhelmingly my elders,
Mm-hmm.
coming together to pray the prayers, to chant the litany of Mary, to remember the women's saints, to really reclaim this was so powerful for the group, but so powerful for me. It was
Mm-hmm.
one of those moments, along with my experience as a lay preacher, that began to bring into the foreground the thing that I didn't want to look at, which
Mm-hmm.
is I have the preparation and gifts for ordained leadership. I wouldn't let
Mm-hmm.
myself think about that for a long time. So
Mm-hmm.
that feast still needs to be celebrated and honored. And there's still a lot of places where there is misunderstanding. Oh my gosh, the New Yorker had for months has had this meme about an article about Mary Magdala with a picture of Mary of Egypt. And
Yeah.
so she's naked with all the hair. And I'm like, that's not Mary Magdalene.
Yeah.
That it's still out there in
Yeah.
popular culture and elsewhere. So let's talk a little bit about the process of reclaiming Mary, what you experienced in that, and what kind of resources people can still tap because they have a little time before the feast to do that.
Yeah. Thanks, Trish, and thanks for your own faithfulness to your call. I often think, the process of reform has many places in the vineyard of reform, and one of the places needs to be people like you and Reverend Jayme, where people can, pray what they're experiencing now. So I also, I'm not a big believer in excommunication. I do believe in the family of Christianity, and so you will always be my sister for sure. About Mary of Magdala, in 1996, we were doing our Women in Church Leadership project, and we realized that we needed to set the record straight that she was not a prostitute. So we created resources um, and prayer experiences where people could hear what the biblical scholarship was, that there's no evidence she was a prostitute, but there's ample evidence that she was the first witness to the resurrection. So that was one part of it. The other part of it was we wanted people to experience women serving in a visible liturgical role. And so we would have the biblical head part, and then we would have the worship part. And I well remember the first one we had in Cleveland, which was my mentor, Father Smiga, came and gave the whole biblical thing. And then Lori Jarecki, and this was held in a parish, Ascension Parish, who was the pastoral minister. I had been in seminary with her. She had an MA in liturgy. So Lori developed the whole prayer part. And so they probably had about 300, 200 people come. But the thing I remember the most about it is I have a friend who's part of a 12-step group, And she brought her whole 12-step community, people recovering from various kinds of addictions, and they sort of sat in the back. They were all in tears when Lori was doing her liturgical thing and preaching. And suddenly it hit me at a huge, deeper level. This is healing a whole lot of stuff for women in Christianity in the church. So that first year we had like 30 celebrations. And these were all downloadable from the website. The next, and they still are. The next year we had 120 and 153. And then in following years, there were anywhere from 250 to 400 celebrations continuing. It's been going on for 30 years. And so we were helped along by things like the Da Vinci Code, books that came out. And we were majorly helped by religion writers and major dailies. I can still remember Larry Stammer doing an article about a celebration, actually in Texas, and he was at the LA Times. And of course, the whole thing about reform prostitute, not a prostitute, that whole sex sells kind of thing. But the religion writers did a great job spreading the word about the biblical scholarship. So and see, this is sort of how systemic change happens. You give people, the whole idea is give people at the local level who are passionate about this, who give them resources, let them do what they do in their local parish or local faith community, and just see what happens. And actually, what happened in 2016, Pope Francis elevated the Feast of Mary of Magdala to the Feast of an Apostle, which is the first contemporary public acknowledgement of her role as apostle to the apostles. So, and that, the whole idea behind the celebrations were to elevate the leadership roles of women in early Christianity. And I think also to begin that healing, empowering process that you experienced in recognizing your own gifts. And then people went to do whatever they needed to do from there. So we have a bunch of wonderful resources on the Future Church website for the upcoming Feast of Mary of Magdala on July 22nd. And Future Church will be live streaming its own special celebration, which will be occurring at my own center, where we're honoring the 3 women who missioned me to begin Future Church as a nonprofit organization in 1994. So I don't know, there's a commercial.
Awesome. Sister Christine, thanks for that commercial, and thanks for helping to direct many of our, to help to direct our attention to futurechurch.org, where we can find those resources. I just clicked into that site this morning myself just to see it, and what a fascinating thing to see how it is that you continue to lift up Mary Magdala in our society. I'm wondering, from our perspective, especially within the inclusive or independent Catholic movement, we tend to see Mary of Magdala as a very strong leader in the early church. I'm wondering what it is that, from your perspective, what it is that she might say and speak to us in this moment, in this very unordinary U.S. moment in which we're going through. What do you think it is that Saint Mary of Magdala would praise and or challenge about this moment in which we're living?
What a fascinating question. And what comes to me is I did write a poem back in the early days about this, and because I think there are many, I guess I would say, difficult emotions that emerge for women when we begin to study the extent to which women's leadership was suppressed by men and the church. And so there's a whole way we have to process that in the early church and today, you know. But so I think the one thing that, and this poem was my way of trying to come to some resolution about that. And the end of the thing, after going through of like, you were betrayed by your brothers whose spin control requires you go from woman witness to whore and yada yada. And then it ended up, what Magdala, woman, Jesus friend, women friend, what have you to say? And the poem ends with only Rabboni. And so Mary Magdala's witness is about teacher. She points to Jesus as teacher. And so I think, the very special relationship she had with Jesus. Also, I mean, she was a huge support to him, aside from, uh, in terms of proclaiming the first proclamation of who Jesus really is. Her whole life was about proclaiming who Jesus really is. And so I think that's what she would call us to proclaim that Jesus is. He loved women and men both. He called women to be with him in his itinerant discipleship. He commissioned them to be about proclaiming God's reign. He taught them how to do that along with the men. And so, I would never want to isolate Mary of Magdala from the message of Jesus, because she would not want that. I think she might have some very interesting perspectives about where things are, but she would also be pointing to Jesus, who has, who in communion with Jesus and following his message has the power to transform that negativity. So, yeah, she'd tell us to go and tell my brothers. That's what you tell the women and the men. Go and tell my brothers that Jesus is risen. So anyway, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe Trish has some things to add to that.
I think that's beautiful and pointed in terms of who needs the message at
Yeah,
times. And
yeah,
I just sort of want to underline, most of our listeners are going to be in our independent, inclusive Catholic movement, but
yeah,
I think it's really important for us to continue to love and support everyone who's tilling the field in our family of origin. I think of people like Phyllis Agano, the
right.
the samurai for the women's diaconate whose scholarship is disregarded over and over again by Rome. It would make your head explode. That we just need to remember this is a fairly new. I hate using the word battle, but in some ways it's a battle. I
Yeah.
remember when I was studying ecclesiology with Susan Wood at St. John's, when I was doing my MDiv, that Susan said to us, well, it used to take 100 to 150 years for the teaching of a council to be received. And the truth is that we have a much more ambitious timeline because we live in a very different kind of world. And yet it takes time for this huge, monstrous, monolithic boat to turn,
Mm.
as Jayme
That's right.
often uses the metaphor. But I want to turn it back to Jayme because he is a fan of Stephen Colbert. And he has invented this fun way that we close out our podcast. So we're coming to the end of our time, so we don't want to miss this opportunity for Jayme to run the questionnaire.
I'm happy to, Reverend Trish. Thank you for that, queuing that up. But I do have to ask you one last question before I get into that, Sister Christine, since we have you
Mhm.
here. And that is because after 10 years of serving the Roman Catholic Church, I stepped outside of it largely because I was formed in this Vatican II vision of what the church
Yeah.
could be that more closely resembled the early church. And I'll be honest, I was ordained under the pontificate of John Paul II, and then along came his Rottweiler, Papa Ratzinger, Benedict XVI, who assigned a very conservative bishop to Austin. And that was really a rupture in my belief in the church. But I'm wondering if you might just share with me and others a few words of hope and or an update, your vision, since you are with FutureChurch, what it is that you see as you look toward the future. Are there glimmers of light coming over the horizon, and or I'm convinced that I left too early, Sister Christine. After I left, and then Pope Francis was elected,
Yeah.
and he brought in this very different vision. And Pope Leo, in some ways, seems to be continuing that, but at the same time, I'm not naive about the inability to be able to turn a super tanker like the Roman Catholic Church on a dime. And
Right.
so I'd love your perspective before we get to the Cutting Edge Catholics Questionnaire.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question. And I doubt that you left too early. You left when you needed to. So God bless your journey as well, because we're all part of this. It's not, I don't know, I'm not a big believer in hard boundaries around Christian communions. And just one other thing, I wanted to say this earlier and it's just come back. For the folks like you, I think of as, part of the scouts in terms of trying to, what's a new unified Christian community going to look like? But the pain of separation, I want to address that because I think you also are experiencing some of the things that the early Christians experienced when they were getting kicked out of the synagogue, because of their belief. And so, I have great hopes. I mean, I'd like to be part of Judaism again. I am part of it. I regret that it had ever happened, but you're not alone in that pain. So you had to follow the truth that you saw. Um, so back to, is there hope for the Roman Catholic Church? I do have hope. I've always had hope because the Spirit is the one that's in charge. And sometimes I think under both John Paul II and Benedict, it was a big attempt to restore, retrieve, not fully implement the vision of Vatican II, and they failed, you know, because the vision is too big to fail, frankly. And so, but Pope Francis saw that, and he is making so many efforts to decentralize decision-making models that had become too focused on the Roman Curia, which had its own level of, I would say, tunnel vision. We attack anybody who says anything different that we do. And I think of it as the burning times, if you want to know the truth. And the fact that we all live through it is a testament to the power of the Spirit. So I do have hope, and it's mostly around his Synod on Synodality. It's a long process, but the thing that got me is that we went from Future Church, Women's Ordination Conference, Culture, all those groups that were not allowed to be on church property, that were you're persona non grata, you are being threatened with excommunication, yada yada. We went to being invited to post our materials on the Synod and Synodality website in Rome. I mean, pinch me. My wonderful successor, Deb Rose Milovec, was able to go into all of the press conferences for the Synod. I had to sit on the front steps of the Sala Stampa to scarf some of their Wi-Fi back in the day. I was not allowed in. So it's, that was pretty immense to me. And that Pope Leo is very committed also to the Synod on Synodality. Pope Francis and Pope Leo have both integrated more women in higher level positions. For the first time in history, a woman is leading the commission, the sickle cell, the dicastery on religious life. And, women have outnumbered men in religious life by many, 3 to 4 to 5 to 1 through the generations. And it was always led by two men, which sort of gave us the mess that we got during the apostolic visitation. So now two women lead that, two sisters. So these are significant changes. I think the other very hopeful sign is the German bishops who are basically saying, we really need to move forward with ordaining women deacons, Pope Leo, and it's basically putting him. I mean, both Francis and Leo have tried to reverse the trend under Benedict and John Paul II of disempowering the national bishops' conferences. The new stuff in canon law hasn't re-empowered them, and so I see that as something hopeful. I think we still have a long way to go on women's ordination to the priesthood, but it's not a cause for burning a woman or a man at the stake that it used to be. And that's a metaphorical stake, but I got denied entry to churches, we had bishops writing to my leadership telling me I could not come and give a talk in a public park. I mean, ridiculous things that are no longer there. Anyway. So sorry,
Sister
I thought
Christine,
it was so
appreciate very
lengthy.
much. Yeah,
Yeah.
appreciate very much your perspective, Sister Christine. We've come to our Cutting Edge Catholics Questionnaire, which is a set of 12 rapid fire questions. You just say the first thing that comes to mind,
Okay, this
and
is
we'll
scary.
look forward to it. It's scary, right?
Right,
Shall we
it
try
is.
it? Here we
Sure, why
go.
not? What the hell?
This is the Cutting Edge Catholics Questionnaire, Saint Mary Magdala Edition. Sister
Okay.
Christine, your favorite biblical woman besides Mary Magdala?
Junia,
You're the most influential woman in church history.
ooh, that Teresa of Avila,
Your favorite theologian or spiritual writer.
Sandra Schneiders,
A book every Catholic should read.
the Bible,
Your favorite spiritual practice.
meditation,
One word that describes Mary Magdala.
courageous,
Your favorite saint besides Mary Magdala.
Oscar Romero,
The most misunderstood aspect of the early church, Sister Christine.
that only men did anything.
The best advice you've ever received.
Pay attention to your inner voice.
One thing Catholics get wrong about reform.
That it's heretical.
Two last questions, Sister
That the
Christine.
church never changes. I guess I want to change that too. What they get wrong is this idea that the church never changes, and it's changed a lot, you know.
Sister Christine, if Mary Magdala had a podcast today, what would she call it?
Rabboni,
And finally, Sister Christine, what gives you hope?
God. What can I
Sister
say?
Christine.
Jesus, God, all those saints through the ages who stood and spoke truth to power, and that's why we've made any progress at all. So,
Amen. Thank you, Sister Christine, for being the inaugural person to try out our Cutting Edge Catholics Questionnaire, Saint Mary Magdala Edition. We've come to the point in our episode of Sister Christine where we tend to share some final thoughts and words. If you don't mind, I'll jump in first, and then I'll kick it over to Reverend Trish, and then we'll give you the final word with us today. I just want to say I bow my head in your direction, Sister Christine. Thank you for being a prophetic voice. All of us are baptized as priest, prophet, and leaders in the church, and you are one who is really taking that seriously, and that just makes me proud. Makes me proud, proud, proud to know you. As one who's from rural Northwest Ohio, I just feel a kinship to you. I almost feel like my grandmother speaking through you, Sister Christine. I hope that you take that in the spirit in which it's offered, because she was just such a tremendous woman in my life that I hold you in the same esteem, and I promise you my prayers for you and all our friends at Future Church as you continue to carry forward the banner of a church that more closely resembles the early church. Reverend Trish.
Well, this has been a joy and a treat to be with you, Chris. And I am just like transported to so many different experiences that I had at your elbow. I remember the time you asked me to cover the Future Church booth at a conference here in Minneapolis that was the local bishop was trying to discipline, and just feeling so proud of myself. Like I get to come and be Chris Schenk, because I do think that for many of us, like being at the elbow of you and others was very empowering. And when you just mentioned that the church is semper reformanda, the church has always been changing. It has never been static. Why would we ever want it to be? Wouldn't that just be a dead letter? And just so blessed that I had the people in my life who not only believed that, but who were willing to take the risk to witness to it at a time when things were getting more and more punitive. So, I just cherish you. I'm grateful for your voice. I hope that this podcast will inspire some people to remember that the work is never done, including correcting the record, and to make moments to continue to raise people's consciousness. And when you describe the people in the back of the church crying. I mean, I've had that experience with people coming here and seeing a woman vested, doing mass, who just are overcome. I never thought I'd see that in my lifetime. This is what we're witnessing to. So thank you so much for giving us an hour of your life to chat with us and share in the 12-step movement, we would say your experience, strength, and hope. So you get to have the final word, though. So we'll close it out after anything you'd like to share.
No, I mean, just thank you to both of you. This has been a lot of fun. I appreciate the opportunity. I guess the only thing I want to say is that I would share is that sometimes in movement work, people focus on the high visibility person in the movement. It's never that person who does it. It's people, and I used to, because I really try to redirect people who say, "Oh, you are so what do you do?" Because it's disempowering them. They have that also in them, or they wouldn't recognize it in someone else. And so that's why we are all called to be part of a movement for a more inclusive Christianity, a more inclusive universe. And it's been my great joy and privilege to have played a small part in that, and to have met wonderful people like Trish Sullivan Bonnie on my way, who you impressed the hell out of me the first time I met you, and you continue to impress me. And I'm very happy to have met Reverend Dr. Jayme today, my fellow corn-fed person from Northwest Ohio. Anyway, so thanks so much, guys. This has been great.
Thank you, Sister Christine Schenk of the Congregation of St. Joseph, an award-winning author and co-founder of FutureChurch. For resources to celebrate St. Mary Magdala, visit futurechurch.org. Thank you for joining us for Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance. I'm Father Jayme Matthias.
And I'm Reverend Trish Sullivan Bonnie.
Let's honor the legacy of St. Mary Magdala.
Thank you for joining us for Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance. For more information on inclusive Catholicism, please visit extraordinarycatholics.faith. Keep the faith.